If you trace population trends across Europe over the last 2 centuries, something almost comforting appears at first. A steady climb. England rises, France rises, Germany rises, Italy rises. From the Industrial Revolution onward, the pattern is remarkably consistent. Medicine improves, sanitation improves, food becomes more reliable, infant mortality falls, populations expand. The lines on the graph move upward like a promise that, despite wars and recessions, the overall direction of history is progress. But then there is one line that refuses to follow the pattern. One line that doesn't simply dip, it collapses. Around the mid-1840s, Ireland's population curve plunges downward with a severity almost unmatched anywhere in modern Western Europe. And what makes it even more remarkable is that the decline never fully reversed. Nearly 2 centuries later, Ireland's population still has not completely recovered to its pre-famine peak. That raises a question that becomes more disturbing the closer you examine it. Why did Ireland lose half its population in roughly 10 years, while England did not? Because this wasn't an isolated Irish disaster. The same potato blight reached England. It reached Scotland, it reached France, it reached Belgium, it even crossed the Atlantic into North America. The disease that triggered the crisis was international, so why did only Ireland experience demographic collapse? The answer isn't simply about potatoes. It's about economics, it's about power, it's about the structure of an entire society. And once you understand it, the story of the Irish famine becomes far more than a story about agriculture. It becomes a story about how vulnerable populations can be when a crisis exposes weaknesses that already existed beneath the surface. Before we uncover how that happened, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you're fascinated by genealogy, ancestry, DNA history, and the hidden forces that shaped modern populations, this channel is built for exactly that kind of investigation. Because what happened in Ireland didn't just change one country, it reshaped millions of family trees across the world, the Ireland that existed before the famine. To understand why Ireland collapsed, you cannot start with the potato, you have to start with the system. By the 1840s, Ireland was part of the British Empire. Its landscape was fertile, its climate was favorable, its soil could produce enormous amounts of food. On paper, Ireland should have been one of Europe's most secure agricultural regions, but ownership told a different story. Much of the land was controlled by large landlords. Many were Anglo-Irish elites. Others were absentee landlords who lived comfortably in England while collecting rent from Irish tenants. The people working the land often did not own it. They rented small plots under constant financial pressure. To pay rent, farmers focused on producing profitable goods, grain, livestock, dairy products, export crops. But much of that food did not stay in Ireland. It moved through ports and into wider British markets. The families growing the food frequently survived on something else. The potato, over time, millions of people became dependent on a single crop because it could provide extraordinary nutrition from a tiny amount of land. For poor tenant families, it wasn't merely food, it was survival. And that survival depended on one dangerous assumption, that the crop would always be there. The potato trap. The variety most commonly grown was known as the lumper potato. It wasn't famous for quality, it wasn't known for flavor, but it produced large yields and could sustain entire families. A single acre could provide enough calories to support several people throughout the year. For those living under severe land constraints, it was almost miraculous, and because it worked so well, dependence deepened, year after year, generation after generation. The population expanded rapidly, from roughly 4 million people in the late 18th century to more than 8 million by the 1840s. At first glance, that growth looked like success, but underneath it was a weakness, a dangerous one. Most potatoes being grown shared very similar genetics. This was essentially a monoculture. And monocultures have a fatal flaw. When something finds a way to kill them, it doesn't stop at one field. It spreads everywhere. The blight arrives. In 1845, that weakness was exposed. A destructive organism called Phytophthora infestans reached Europe through international trade routes. It spread rapidly, carried by moisture, wind, and contaminated shipments. When it arrived in Ireland, farmers began noticing strange changes. Leaves blackened, plants wilted, a smell of rot lingered over fields. Then harvest time arrived. What should have been healthy potatoes had become black, mushy masses beneath the soil. The first year caused widespread alarm, but many families survived by using stored food and emergency reserves. The real catastrophe came in 1846. The blight returned. This time with devastating force, across huge areas of Ireland, the potato crop failed almost completely. The primary food source for millions disappeared. And this is where many simplified versions of the story become misleading. Because Ireland did not suddenly become a land without food. In many places, food still existed. The real problem was access. Why England did not collapse. This is the part that answers the title. England also experienced the potato blight. But England did not lose half its population. Why? Because England was fundamentally different. By the 1840s, England possessed a diversified economy. Its population did not depend on a single crop for survival. Food came from multiple sources: domestic agriculture, international imports, industrial wages, expanding transportation networks. When shortages occurred, alternatives existed. Food prices rose, pressure increased, but society had buffers. England had purchasing power, it had trade networks, it had access to replacement food sources. Ireland did not. Millions of Irish families depended on a crop that had suddenly vanished, and they lacked the resources needed to replace it. So while England faced a crisis of rising costs, Ireland faced a crisis of starvation. That difference changed everything. One society absorbed the shock, the other broke beneath it. The policies that defined the disaster. The crisis was made worse by political decisions. Many British officials subscribed to laissez-faire economic ideas. The belief was that markets should largely regulate themselves. Government intervention was viewed with suspicion, even during famine. One of the most influential administrators was Charles Trevelyan. He believed excessive relief could create dependency. As a result, assistance often arrived slowly. Public works programs required starving people to perform exhausting labor. Road building projects employed workers who were already weakened by hunger. Soup kitchens opened, then closed. Policies shifted repeatedly. Meanwhile, conditions continued to deteriorate. The famine moved faster than the response, and every delay increased the death toll, the exodus. As hunger spread, people began to leave. At first, migration was local. Families moved in search of food or work. Soon, it became something much larger: mass immigration. Many landlords evicted tenants, small farms disappeared, entire communities were uprooted. People faced impossible choices: stay and risk starvation, or leave and risk death on the journey. Hundreds of thousands boarded overcrowded vessels, later remembered as coffin ships. Disease spread rapidly. Food was scarce. Many passengers died before reaching their destination. Bodies were buried at sea. Yet even this migration was only part of the story. A huge number never crossed the Atlantic. They crossed the Irish Sea. The Irish, who helped build Britain. Hundreds of thousands of Irish migrants arrived in cities such as London, Liverpool, Manchester, and Glasgow. Neighborhoods transformed almost overnight. Housing shortages intensified. Disease spread through overcrowded districts. But these migrants also became essential to Britain's industrial economy. They built railways, dug canals, worked docks, constructed roads, labored in factories, and helped power the expansion of Victorian Britain. Over generations, many Irish families blended into broader British society, which explains something that surprises many people today. Modern DNA tests frequently reveal Irish ancestry among people who previously believed their families were entirely English, Scottish, or Welsh. The famine left a biological footprint that still appears in family trees nearly 2 centuries later. If you're finding this story connects history with something more personal, family, ancestry, identity, and the question of where we come from, consider subscribing. Many people who discover unexpected Irish ancestry are actually uncovering the legacy of the very events we're discussing today, and the next part explains how this crisis reshaped entire continents, how the famine changed the world. The Irish diaspora expanded across the globe. In the United States, Irish immigrants arrived in extraordinary numbers. Many encountered poverty and discrimination, yet they became central to the construction of railroads, cities, and infrastructure. Over time, Irish American communities grew into major political and cultural forces. In Australia, Irish migrants and convicts helped shape colonial society. Their influence remains visible in Australian culture today. Meanwhile, Ireland itself continued to change. Entire regions became permanently less populated. Abandoned cottages slowly collapsed into the landscape. The Irish language suffered severe decline in many affected areas. Communities that had existed for generations disappeared. The demographic wound remained visible long after the famine ended. The question most people never ask. There's another reason this event remains unique. Most countries eventually recover from population disasters. Wars end, birth rates rebound, lost numbers return. Ireland was different. The famine triggered a cycle of immigration that continued for generations. Young people kept leaving. Economic opportunities often existed elsewhere. The population never experienced the dramatic recovery seen in many other European nations. That is why the downward plunge on the graph is still visible today. The effects never truly stopped. They simply changed form. Conclusion. So, why did Ireland lose half its population in 10 years while England did not? Because the Blight alone was not enough to cause collapse. The disease struck both places. The difference was resilience. England had diversified food supplies, broader markets, industrial wages, trade networks. Alternative sources of food. Ireland had become dangerously dependent on a single crop within a system that left millions vulnerable when that crop disappeared. When the potato failed, there was no effective buffer, no adequate replacement. no safety net capable of protecting the people most at risk. The result was not merely famine, it was demographic rupture, a transformation so profound that its effects remain visible nearly 2 centuries later. If you enjoyed this investigation, subscribe for more documentaries exploring the intersection of history, genealogy, ancestry, and DNA. And if your family has Irish roots, leave your surname and ancestral region in the comments. Every family story adds another thread to a much larger historical tapestry. Because the Irish famine did not simply reduce a population, it redistributed it across Britain, across North America, across Australia, and across generations yet to be born. Its signature remains visible in DNA tests, in surnames, in census records, and in the empty places where entire communities once stood. A silent reminder that the most important events in history are often not measured only by the people who died, but by the millions who lived, moved, and carried that story with them into the future.